In a bustling office, a racist boss humiliates and fires an elderly black employee in front of staff. The boss's arrogance contrasts with the grandfather's calm dignity. A single symbolic act shifts the mood, and the chapter ends on a cliffhanger that hints this old man is far more than what anyone assumes. Don't keep dead weight around here, especially not your kind. The words dropped like poison in the fluorescent-lit boardroom, slicing through the chatter of employees who had gathered for the Monday morning staff meeting. Heads turned. Some workers looked down at their laptops, pretending not to hear. Others stared, caught between disbelief and fear. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and carpet cleaner, but the real stench was arrogance, the smugness of a man who believed he owned the world. At the front of the long glass table stood Richard Hayes, the CEO of Hayes Global Logistics. He was tall, well-fed, and draped in an expensive suit that shimmered under the lights. His hand rested on the back of a leather chair as though he were claiming territory. His pale blue eyes flicked toward his target, and his lips curled with satisfaction. Across from him sat Earl Johnson, a 68-year-old janitor who had worked in this company longer than most executives had been alive. His uniform was faded, his hands rough with years of labor, but his posture carried quiet dignity. Earl did not flinch at the insult. He simply adjusted his glasses, as though he hadn't heard correctly. As though such venom couldn't possibly be meant for him, I said. Richard sneered. Louder this time. We don't need a black relic sweeping floors in a 21st century corporation. Consider this your last day. The words rippled through the room. A young assistant gasped. A senior manager shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But no one spoke. Silence was safer. Silence kept paychecks flowing. Earl stood slowly, his knees creaking but his spine straight. His eyes swept the room, faces avoiding his, eyes glued to screens, hands trembling against notepads. He saw fear, complicity, shame. But he did not see courage. With deliberate calm, Earl reached into the pocket of his worn uniform. He pulled out a small leather wallet, cracked and scuffed from decades of use. From it, he withdrew a laminated company ID, yellowed at the edges. Without a word, he raised it high for all to see. This badge, Earl said, his voice steady, was given to me the day this company opened its doors. I've been here longer than those walls, longer than those desks, longer than you. His gaze locked with Richard's. And you will not erase me with a sentence. For a moment, the room shifted. The badge gleamed under the lights, not just plastic but a symbol. A relic of loyalty. Proof that the man being discarded was part of the foundation itself. Richard smirked, masking the flicker of unease that passed across his face. You think that means something? This is business, old man. Business doesn't care about loyalty. It cares about results. And you don't produce results. Get out of my building. He snapped his fingers toward security standing near the door. Two guards stepped forward, their hesitation betraying discomfort. No one wanted to be part of this spectacle, but Richard's authority was absolute. Earl did not move. His voice cut through the tension. You can take my badge. You can take my uniform. But remember this. Richard Hayes' truth has a way of showing itself when pride blinds a man. The words carried a strange weight, like prophecy. Employees shifted uneasily, sensing something unspoken, something larger than the moment. Richard's smirk widened, but his laugh rang hollow. Truth? The only truth here is that I own this company, and you're nothing. Get him out. The guards reached for Earl's arms. He allowed them to guide him toward the door, his steps slow, deliberate, like a man walking with dignity through fire. Just before crossing the threshold, he turned his head. His eyes lingered on the rows of silent faces. His tone softened. One day soon, you'll see who really built this company. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled in uneasy relief. Richard straightened his tie, basking in his dominance. "Now where were we?" he said, as though nothing had happened. Laptops opened. Pens scratched against paper. But no one truly heard him anymore. Their minds were still on the old man's words. Outside, in the sterile hallway, Earl paused. He slipped the badge back into his pocket, but not before glancing at the reverse side. Faded ink, almost invisible, marked it with initials, 3 letters only a few people in the world would recognize. His lips curved into the faintest smile. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, almost like a drum roll, and then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Earl looked up, his eyes sharpening. Whoever was coming would change everything. Tomorrow, the world would learn who Earl Johnson truly was. The morning after Earl's abrupt firing, the office felt different. The air seemed heavier, as if every fluorescent bulb hung just a little lower. Computers hummed, phones rang, and chairs squeaked. But the usual rhythm of corporate life was fractured. Employees clustered in small groups, huddled near water coolers and coffee machines. Words spilled in hushed tones, faces flushed with a mix of shock and curiosity. "Did you hear what happened yesterday?" whispered Clara, a young marketing associate, to her colleague. "Yes." "With Earl? I can't believe he was fired like that." "In front of everyone," replied Mark, adjusting his tie nervously. "I mean, he's been here forever." That was harsh. Across the hall, a senior manager, Janet, leaned against the wall, her arms crossed. She watched employees scurry past, noting the fear and discomfort in their eyes. Janet had been at the company for over 20 years, but even she had never seen Richard act so openly cruel. Richard strode through the office, exuding the same confidence he always did. Yet beneath the tailored suit and polished shoes, a flicker of unease gnawed at him. He noticed employees avoiding eye contact, their whispers barely concealed. The murmur of doubt, subtle but persistent, unsettled him more than any boardroom challenge ever could. He approached his office, slammed the door behind him, and sat at his massive mahogany desk. The sunlight streaming through the blinds painted thin lines across his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. He scowled at the blank screen before him. Emails, memos, and spreadsheets blurred together. None of it mattered. What mattered was one man, a janitor, an old black relic who had dared to stand up and speak truth. Meanwhile, Earl walked calmly through the streets outside the building. The crisp morning air filled his lungs. He was heading toward a small diner a few blocks away, where he knew a familiar face would be waiting. Inside the diner, the smell of fried bacon and fresh coffee mingled with the chatter of early patrons. At a corner booth, Mr. Thompson, a graying man in his 70s, waved Earl over. He had been a colleague of Earl's long before corporate policies and power struggles had defined the office. "You handled yourself well yesterday," Mr. Thompson said quietly, his voice edged with admiration. Not everyone could stay calm with haze breathing down their neck like that. Earl sipped his black coffee, his eyes scanning the room. "Calm is all I had left," he replied. "Words don't scare me. It's people who forget what loyalty looks like that I worry about." Mr. Thompson nodded. "Rumors are spreading fast. Employees are talking about you, questioning Hayes, wondering if he went too far." Earl smiled faintly. "Let them talk. Let them wonder. The truth always has its way of coming out sooner or later." Back in the office, Richard's phone buzzed incessantly. Emails, notifications, calls, each one a small needle poking at his composure. Reports from his managers trickled in, each confirming the growing unease among staff. Some employees refused to attend his morning meeting. Others openly questioned decisions he had made. The walls of his office seemed to shrink, closing in on him. Richard leaned back in his chair and gritted his teeth. He had believed firing Earl would be a simple demonstration of power. Instead, it had sown seeds of doubt that were growing faster than he could control. By lunchtime, the office was buzzing. People exchanged stories about Earl's contributions, how he had quietly solved problems, mentored new hires, and even stopped costly mistakes without anyone noticing. His name carried weight beyond his title. And for the first time, many realized that a single decision by Richard Hayes had shaken the foundation of the company culture itself. Meanwhile, Earl returned to his small apartment, carefully removing his worn ID from his pocket. He placed it on the counter next to a faded photograph of him with his late wife and children. Quietly, he whispered, "They'll see soon." They'll all see. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware of the storm brewing inside a corporate tower. Inside, whispers turned to chatter. Unease turned to speculation. And beyond all of it, Earl's calm confidence radiated like a quiet drumbeat, promising that Richard Hayes' arrogance would not go unchallenged. By the end of the day, something had shifted. The office was no longer just a building. It was a stage. And in the wings, Earl Johnson's story was just beginning to unfold. Behind every whispered conversation, a question lingered: who was Earl Johnson really? And why did Richard's power feel suddenly fragile? The morning sun spilled through the office windows, illuminating the long rows of desks, the hum of computers, and the subtle tension lingering in the air. Hayes Global Logistics had the appearance of normalcy, employees typing, phones ringing, but beneath the polished exterior, ripples of doubt grew stronger with each passing hour. At her desk, Clara tapped a pen against her notebook, her eyes darting toward the hallway where Richard passed. She had overheard fragments of conversations, whispered questions, and fleeting glances. Earl Johnson's name was on everyone's lips, not with the scorn Richard had intended, but with quiet respect. "Did you know he was a war hero?" asked Mark, leaning toward Clara's desk. His voice lowered as if the walls had ears. "I overheard a client mention something. Earl saved lives overseas, and nobody here even knew." Clara blinked. "A war hero? The janitor?" Mark nodded solemnly. "Yeah, and apparently he's been awarded medals, recognition that some people just don't want you to know about." Across the office, whispers turned into hushed debates. A group of interns speculated about Earl's past, trading anecdotes pulled from years of casual observation. He had been more than a janitor. He had been a quiet force, a guardian in the shadows, someone who had touched lives in ways no one in the corporate hierarchy could comprehend. Meanwhile, Richard Hayes sat in his corner office, unaware of the storm building behind him. He reviewed spreadsheets, signed memos, and sent emails, believing he had neutralized the problem. Firing Earl was supposed to be a demonstration of control. But something in the hallway murmurs and sidelong glances gnawed at the edges of his confidence. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from the HR manager. "Several employees are discussing Earl's background. There's growing concern about the firing." He scowled. "Concern? About what? That I did my job?" He muttered to himself. The word job felt hollow in his own mouth. He had expected compliance, not whispers, not intrigue, not curiosity. Meanwhile, Earl's day unfolded quietly. After breakfast at the diner with Mr. Thompson, he walked through the city streets, unnoticed by most, yet recognized by a few who nodded respectfully. The old man's calm demeanor, the slight curve of his lips, carried authority not tied to wealth, titles, or suits, but to the life he had led and the integrity he had upheld. Back at the office, Clara and Mark dug through old company newsletters, archives, and files, uncovering mentions of Earl. Photos surfaced of him assisting in emergency drills, coordinating community projects, and mentoring young employees. Each discovery painted a portrait of a man deeply embedded in the company's fabric, indispensable in ways the executives had ignored. A rumor reached the ears of Janet, the senior manager. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the documents. "This changes everything," she whispered to herself. "This man, he wasn't just a janitor. He's been a backbone for decades. And Richard, he's blind to it." Richard, in his office, tapped his pen against the desk, restless. The unease began to snowball. Emails from clients requesting Earl by name reached his inbox. Calls from vendors praising Earl's work and lamenting his sudden departure arrived. Even the security staff, who had escorted Earl out, exchanged knowing looks, sensing they had been part of something morally questionable. As afternoon approached, whispers grew louder, no longer confined to cubicles and water coolers. A few brave employees began posting subtle acknowledgments on internal company boards, stories of Earl saving projects, preventing disasters, mentoring the overlooked. Each post carried an undercurrent of silent rebellion, a quiet questioning of authority. Richard paced. He felt the walls of the office closing in on him. What had been a show of power now felt like a miscalculation of magnitude he hadn't anticipated. The foundation he had assumed unshakable now seemed riddled with cracks. In a small park outside the office, Earl sat on a bench, watching children play and couples walk by. His gaze was distant, reflective, yet unwavering. He held a folded newspaper in his hands, the headline partially obscured, yet the hint of a story breaking out in the city already whispered to him. His legacy was about to surface, not as rumor, but as undeniable truth. By evening, the first hints of Earl Johnson's past were surfacing publicly, and Richard Hayes' confidence teetered on the edge of collapse. By the next morning, the office hummed with an energy Richard Hayes could not control. The firing of Earl Johnson, meant to be a demonstration of authority, had instead created a ripple and undercurrent of suspicion, respect, and quiet rebellion that now coursed through every floor. In the break room, whispers had transformed into small conversations. People exchanged what they had discovered: Earl's military service, his community leadership, his decades of dedication. Stories painted a picture of an extraordinary life hidden behind a janitor's uniform. "Did you see the article?" Clara whispered to Mark, huddled near the coffee machine. "Local news picked it up. Someone tipped them off about Earl. They're calling him a local hero." Mark's eyes widened. "A hero? This is going viral. People are going to start questioning why Richard fired him." Across the office, managers exchanged concerned glances. Janet, the senior manager, had received calls from clients asking about Earl. One vendor, known for being strict and no-nonsense, had personally called to commend him for preventing a costly shipment error years ago. Richard stormed through the hallways, trying to maintain his composure. He expected loyalty, silence, compliance. Instead, he found raised eyebrows, murmured conversations, and the subtle resistance of a workforce beginning to see past his facade. He entered his office, slammed the door, and glared at the blinking notifications on his computer screen. Emails, text messages, and internal posts all pointed to one thing: Earl Johnson was not just an employee. He was a cornerstone, one that Richard had foolishly dismissed. A call from the PR department only added fuel to the fire. "Sir, the local news is running a story about Earl. They're calling him a community hero and highlighting his military service," the PR manager explained. Voice carefully measured. Richard slammed his fist onto the desk. "Hero? He's a janitor. That's all he is. No one cares about his medals." The manager hesitated. "Sir, people do. And the more they hear, the more they question." Well, the firing itself. Meanwhile, Earl moved quietly in the city. He attended a small ceremony at a local community center, where several residents approached him, thanking him for acts of kindness long forgotten. He smiled, nodded, and accepted their gratitude without fanfare. His dignity, calm and unshakable, contrasted sharply with the chaos brewing back at the office. Back at Hayes Global Logistics, employees began sharing posts on internal channels highlighting Earl's contributions. One post showed him helping a new employee navigate the building on their first day. Another detailed how he had stopped a security breach years ago, saving sensitive company data. Richard watched it all unfold from his corner office, his face growing paler with each story. He had thought the man beneath him was invisible, replaceable. Now the very foundation of his authority was being questioned, quietly, persistently, irreversibly. He summoned his top managers to a meeting. "I want everyone to stop this nonsense," he barked. "No more stories. No more posts. Control this before it spreads further." Janet, usually compliant, met his gaze evenly. "Sir, these stories aren't nonsense. They're the truth. People know it, and they respect it. You can't erase decades of loyalty and contribution with one dismissal." Richard's jaw tightened. He felt the first real cracks of panic creeping in. Control, which had always been absolute, now felt tenuous. Every glance at his employees reminded him that they were silently judging him. Every whisper carried Earl's name like a shadow stretching across the office walls. By late afternoon, whispers reached the boardroom. Even board members, who had never met Earl, began questioning Richard's judgment. His authority, once unquestioned, was teetering on the edge. Earl, oblivious to the turmoil inside the building, returned to a quiet bench in the park. Children played nearby, and pigeons fluttered past. He watched the world move calmly, knowing that change, inevitable and unstoppable, was coming. His patience and dignity were like a silent drumbeat, heralding the downfall of arrogance. And inside the office tower, Richard Hayes felt it, an unfamiliar, cold sensation, fear. The first crack in his empire had appeared, and he could do nothing to stop what was already in motion. By the end of the day, Earl Johnson's influence had begun to infiltrate the company, quietly undermining Richard's control and setting the stage for exposure. Office was no longer a place of muted compliance. Conversations had shifted from hushed whispers to bold, purposeful discussions. Earl Johnson's story had become the pulse of Hayes Global Logistics, a heartbeat Richard could neither ignore nor control. Clara gathered a few colleagues around the break room table, her voice low but determined. "We can't let this slide. Earl has given decades of his life to this company, and Hayes fired him just because of who he is. We need to make sure everyone knows the truth." Mark nodded, glancing toward the hallway. "People are already talking online. Posts about him are getting shared outside the office. It's not just us, it's spreading citywide." Janet, normally cautious and reserved, leaned in. "I've received calls from multiple clients asking for him by name. They want to work with him, not us. If this continues, the company's reputation is at risk." Richard, meanwhile, had retreated to his corner office, his facade of control cracking under the weight of mounting pressure. Every phone call, every email, every glance from his employees reminded him of his miscalculation. He had underestimated the respect Earl commanded, not only within the company but beyond its walls. He banged his fist against the polished desk. "This is ridiculous," he shouted to the empty room. "He's a janitor. A janitor. How can they praise him like this?" A soft knock at the door made him spin around. His assistant, a young woman with nervous eyes, stepped inside. "Sir, the news outlets are calling for comments. They want to speak about Earl's contributions, about the firing. People are noticing." Richard's face hardened. "No comment. Shut it down. Control it all." But the message had already spread. Social media posts praised Earl for decades of service, for mentoring young employees, for his military valor, and for acts of kindness that had gone unnoticed for years. Community groups began sharing stories, tagging the company, questioning the ethics of his dismissal. Meanwhile, Earl moved quietly through the city, unaware of the storm his reputation had unleashed. He visited a local veterans hall where old friends and comrades approached him warmly. Each handshake, each nod, each word of gratitude reinforced the truth of his character. Back at the office, employees began small acts of resistance. Some intentionally referenced Earl in meetings. Others displayed badges or photos of him at their desks. Quietly, subtly, they reminded everyone, especially Richard, that he could not erase a man who had given his life to service. Clara whispered to Mark as they left the break room, "It's like a ripple. One person stands with him, and it spreads. People see injustice, and they act." Richard paced his office, unable to sit still. He realized, finally, that authority built on fear and prejudice could crumble faster than loyalty built on respect. His arrogance, once unshakable, was now being challenged not by one, but by an entire workforce inspired by a single man. In the late afternoon, Janet received a call from a major client. "We are reconsidering our contracts with Hayes Global Logistics," the voice on the other line said. "We want to know what steps you are taking to address the treatment of Earl Johnson. His reputation precedes him, and so does our concern for ethical practices." Janet's brow furrowed. "Understood," she replied cautiously, glancing at the office filled with employees quietly watching, waiting, judging. Richard slammed the phone down. His suit felt tighter, the office smaller, the world shifting beneath his feet. He realized that the power he had wielded so arrogantly was now slipping fast. Earl, sitting quietly on a park bench that evening, watched the sun dip below the skyline. The chaos inside the building was invisible to him, yet he felt its echoes in the air. He knew that change was inevitable. The dignity he had carried, the patience he had shown, had sparked something larger than himself, an unstoppable wave of justice. The office lights flickered on, casting long shadows across desks, chairs, and walls. Within those shadows, whispers and murmurs grew into voices demanding recognition, accountability, and respect. By nightfall, the city was buzzing with Earl Johnson's story. Richard Hayes' empire of control was beginning to collapse, and no one, not even him, could stop the ripple he had set in motion. By morning, Hayes Global Logistics had become a topic not just in the office, but across the city. Screens in the lobby, employees' phones, and social media feeds flashed with stories praising Earl Johnson, the man fired simply for being black. Headlines highlighted decades of dedication, military service, and acts of community heroism. "Have you seen this?" Clara whispered to Mark, her fingers flying over her keyboard. The local news ran a feature on Earl. "They're calling him a pillar of the community and a hero." Mark's eyes widened. "I knew this would blow up, but wow, it's everywhere. People are talking about it online. Shares, comments. It's spreading like wildfire." Richard Hayes, now in his office, slammed his laptop shut. The polished mahogany desk rattled with the force. "How did this happen? I fired him yesterday, one day, and it's chaos." His assistant peeked nervously around the doorframe. "Sir, it's..." People are outraged. Clients are calling. Some employees are refusing to take meetings until the issue is addressed. And social media, well? Richard's face turned red, vein throbbing in his temple. Social media doesn't matter. This is business. Business, they'll get over it. But outside his office, the atmosphere had changed. Employees moved with a new confidence, quietly discussing Earl's achievements and contributions. They shared screenshots of articles and posts, showing coworkers the growing wave of recognition. Janet walked past Richard's office, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I understand. We are addressing the situation," she said, glancing at employees now gathering in small groups. Her voice carried the weight of authority tempered with conscience, something Richard lacked. Earl, unaware of the storm, attended a small ceremony honoring local veterans. The hall buzzed with applause and respect. Each handshake, each pat on the shoulder reminded him of the life he had led, the principles he had upheld, and the quiet power of patience and dignity. A journalist approached him afterward. "Mr. Johnson, your story has captured the city. How do you feel about being fired from Hayes Global Logistics?" Earl smiled softly. "I've lived my life with integrity. If the truth coming to light helps others see that dignity matters more than power, then I am content." Back at the office, Richard's phone rang incessantly. Clients, reporters, and colleagues demanded explanations. His arrogance was now replaced with visible panic. Every word he uttered sounded hollow, forced, unconvincing. Clara and Mark circulated an internal email highlighting Earl's contributions. The response was immediate. Employees voiced support, shared stories, and demanded recognition for his decades of service. Even managers who had previously stayed silent began to speak up, their quiet resistance forming a chorus against Richard's authority. The corporate culture Richard had controlled through fear and prejudice was unraveling. Every whispered complaint, every shared story, every article mentioning Earl chipped away at the illusion of absolute control. By late afternoon, local TV stations ran segments showing Earl's decades of service. Footage of him mentoring young employees, assisting veterans, and quietly solving crises played repeatedly. The city responded with admiration and outrage at the injustice. Richard sat frozen in his office, staring at a screen filled with tweets, videos, and messages. His hands shook. He had believed firing Earl would demonstrate power. Instead, it broadcasted incompetence and cruelty to the world. Meanwhile, Earl returned to his apartment, sipping coffee quietly as the evening light softened the skyline. He reflected on the day's events, calm in the knowledge that truth had its way of revealing itself. He did not boast, did not gloat. His dignity remained intact, a silent contrast to the chaos consuming Richard Hayes. The office lights flickered on as employees lingered, reading stories, sharing messages, and discussing the injustice. Even the security team, who had once escorted Earl out, now whispered among themselves, admiration replacing previous hesitation. By nightfall, the media storm had reached a fever pitch, and Richard Hayes' once unshakable control over the company now teetered on the brink of collapse. Earl's quiet revolution had begun, and there was no turning back. By the start of the week, the office was unrecognizable. The usual hum of obedience and quiet compliance had been replaced by a subtle, coordinated resistance. Employees exchanged glances filled with purpose. The whispers that had started as curiosity had grown into determination. Clara walked through the hallways, clipboard in hand, and stopped by a group of colleagues. "We can't stay silent," she said firmly. "Earl dedicated decades of his life to this company. Now it's our turn to support him. Let's document everything, every time he prevented a crisis, every way he helped us. The truth needs to be undeniable." Mark nodded. "I've already started compiling emails and reports that show how much he's contributed. This will be concrete proof for HR clients and even the media if it spreads further." Janet, seated at her desk, spoke without looking up. "I've received several calls from clients expressing outrage. They want action. They want recognition for Earl, and they want assurance that this company doesn't condone prejudice." Meanwhile, Richard Hayes paced in his office, every movement betraying his growing panic. His desk was littered with reports, memos, and notifications about Earl's story spreading in the press. His authority, once absolute, now felt fragile. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "I fired him, just fired him, and they're rallying around him?" His assistant, fidgeting nervously, tried to calm him. "Sir, it's not just rallying. People are taking action. Internal emails, posts, client inquiries. It's gaining momentum." Richard's hands trembled as he gripped his chair. "I can't let them undermine me. I need to control this." But control, he soon realized, was slipping through his fingers. Employees were no longer acting out of fear. They acted out of conviction. And conviction, once awakened, could not easily be silenced. In the office corridors, small acts of rebellion multiplied. A group of employees decorated the break room with posters celebrating Earl's contributions. Another group compiled a digital timeline of his achievements and shared it company-wide. Screens flashed with photos of Earl mentoring new hires, preventing costly mistakes, and quietly handling emergencies. The message was clear. Earl Johnson was more than a janitor. He was the lifeblood of the company. And anyone who dismissed him without cause would face scrutiny, not just internally, but publicly. Richard's phone rang again. This time, it was a major client, questioning his leadership and ethics. "We are reconsidering our contracts with your company," the voice said. "Our decisions will reflect how you treat people like Earl Johnson." Richard's face turned red. He slammed the phone down, his entire body trembling. "This is madness," he yelled to the empty office. "A janitor? A single man bringing down everything I built?" Across the city, Earl remained unaware of the chaos his story had unleashed. He met with a few old friends at a local veterans hall, sharing coffee and quiet laughter. His calm demeanor, a stark contrast to Richard's panic, radiated dignity and confidence. Meanwhile, back at Hayes Global Logistics, the momentum of employee rebellion could not be contained. Internal reports, memos, and testimonials documenting Earl's decades of dedication circulated rapidly. Even the security personnel, who had once escorted him out, were now quietly advocating for him. By mid-afternoon, the office had transformed into a battlefield of silent resistance. Every glance, every discussion, every shared document chipped away at Richard's authority. He had relied on fear and prejudice to maintain control, but the awakening of collective conscience rendered those tools useless. Richard slumped into his chair, finally realizing the depth of the storm he had unleashed. The arrogance that had defined him now felt like a burden. The power he thought absolute was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Outside the office, Earl walked quietly through the streets, his steps measured, his expression calm. The city was buzzing with his story. The employees' quiet revolution inside the company was only a reflection of a larger truth. Dignity and integrity could not be erased by arrogance or prejudice. By the end of the day, Richard Hayes faced an unprecedented challenge. The entire company, inspired by Earl Johnson, had united against injustice, and his empire of fear was unraveling faster than he could comprehend. By the next morning, story of Earl Johnson had spread beyond social media, reaching newspapers, radio stations, and television networks. Hayes Global Logistics headquarters was suddenly under scrutiny. Cameras parked outside, reporters asking questions, and tweets flooding the city in real time. Inside the office, employees gathered in small groups, sharing updates from news feeds. Screens displayed headlines like, "Local hero fired for decades of service," and "Corporate arrogance versus dignity." The Earl Johnson story. Clara whispered to Mark, eyes wide. "They're coming to interview people inside the company. We need to be ready. This is our chance to support him publicly." Mark nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and courage. "Everyone's talking. Everyone knows the truth. We just have to let it shine." Richard Hayes paced in his corner office, agitated. He watched employees huddled around screens, sharing articles and social posts about Earl. His face grew red with anger and panic. "This is absurd," he shouted. "How is a janitor dictating what happens in my company?" His assistant hesitated. "Sir, it's not just inside the company. The media, the city, everyone is paying attention. Your decision is being questioned publicly." Richard slammed a fist on his desk. "I don't answer to the media. I answer to me. And I fired him because I could. End of story." Meanwhile, Earl walked calmly toward the Hayes Global headquarters. Journalists recognized him immediately, microphones raised, cameras rolling. Flashbulbs popped. People called out his name. Children waved. Veterans saluted. Earl stopped at the steps, taking a moment to straighten his jacket. His expression was serene, almost regal. He did not shout, did not plead. He simply stood there, letting his presence speak for itself. Inside, Richard was informed that Earl had arrived. His assistant stammered, He's here, sir." Outside the building, Richard's hand shook as he adjusted his tie. "Outside? Show him in. Now I'll handle this." As Earl entered the lobby, employees watched in silence, a collective tension thick in the air. Richard attempted to project authority, his voice booming. "Earl Johnson, we." Earl raised a hand calmly. "Richard Hayes, there's no need for theatrics. I've done my work, served my community, and treated people with respect. I never asked for recognition. But truth finds its way." Employees around the lobby murmured, nodding. Some applauded softly. Clara whispered, "Finally." "Someone is saying it aloud." Reporters pressed forward, capturing every word. Earl spoke not with anger, but with clarity and calm conviction. "The company has always been about people. Not walls, not desks, not fear. I did my part. And when injustice is done, it cannot be hidden. Arrogance cannot outweigh truth." Richard's face turned redder, his attempts at control unraveling. He stammered, trying to regain composure, but his words faltered. Every reporter, every employee, every camera reminded him of the consequences of his actions. Outside, social media feeds exploded as live streams captured the confrontation. The janitor versus the CEO trended citywide. Commentators debated the ethics of the firing. Viewers expressed outrage and support for Earl, praising his calmness and integrity. Earl's calm demeanor was a mirror, reflecting Richard's growing panic. He did not raise his voice, did not argue. He simply stated the truth, letting the weight of decades of integrity speak louder than Richard's bluster. Employees now openly took sides, many stepping forward to corroborate Earl's achievements. HR staff, vendors, and even security personnel confirmed his dedication and service. The balance of power had shifted in a matter of hours, and Richard could feel it. By the evening, the lobby had transformed from a corporate space into a stage. Every glance, every whisper, every camera shot magnified the contrast between Earl's unwavering dignity and Richard's crumbling arrogance. The public confrontation left Richard exposed and humiliated. For the first time, he realized that authority built on prejudice and fear could collapse in a single day. The question now lingered: what would be the next move, and how far would the ripple of justice go? The morning sun revealed an office in chaos. Hayes Global Logistics, once a symbol of rigid control and hierarchy, now quivered under the weight of public scrutiny and internal dissent. Richard Hayes had always believed authority came from fear and power. But today, those foundations were crumbling. Employees moved confidently, no longer whispering in corridors but openly questioning decisions and challenging Richard's leadership. Emails poured in from clients demanding accountability and expressing outrage over Earl's dismissal. Every message chipped away at the CEO's image, turning the empire he had built into a house of sand. Clara walked through the office, her head held high. "It's happening," she told Mark, her eyes bright with determination. "People are standing up. We're showing that dignity matters more than authority." Mark nodded, his fingers scrolling through the growing pile of client emails and internal reports praising Earl. "And Richard has no control over it. None. It's like watching a giant crack from the inside out." In the executive suite, Richard pounded his fist against the polished desk. "This is unacceptable. Every client, every employee, every reporter, how did this happen?" His assistant tried to calm him, but even she could feel the tension. "Sir, it's the truth. People respect Earl. They've seen what he's done, and they are reacting." "You can't fight that." Richard's face twisted in frustration. He had tried to assert dominance through fear, through prejudice, through power alone. But the truth and the loyalty Earl had earned proved stronger than all his bluster. Outside the office, reporters gathered, cameras flashing, microphones pointed toward the building. News outlets covered every angle, showing the stark contrast between Earl's calm dignity and Richard's visible panic. The city watched as arrogance and injustice were confronted by truth and integrity. Inside, employees continued their quiet rebellion. Vendors confirmed Earl's contributions. HR staff documented decades of loyalty. Security personnel spoke out about his commitment and reliability. Every voice added to the momentum, building an undeniable case that Richard Hayes had acted recklessly and unjustly. Richard, realizing his empire of fear was collapsing, called an emergency board meeting. Executives and board members arrived, their expressions a mix of concern and caution. For the first time, Richard faced not silent obedience, but scrutiny from the very people who had once reinforced his authority. "Richard," the CFO began cautiously, "we need to address the situation immediately. Contracts are being reconsidered, clients are withdrawing, and employees are openly questioning your decisions. This is more than just a PR problem. It's a structural threat to the company." Richard's jaw clenched. "No, it's temporary. People will forget." "They always do." Janet shook her head. "Not this time. Not with Earl Johnson. His story is public. His reputation is undeniable. And the people are choosing dignity over fear." Meanwhile, Earl remained calm, meeting quietly with old friends and community leaders. He did not boast, did not gloat. His power was subtle, built on respect, integrity, and decades of unwavering service. Yet, its impact was undeniable. By late afternoon, the full scope of Richard's failure became clear. Major clients formally withdrew contracts. Employee protests, both verbal and through social media, intensified. Local news outlets ran follow-up stories highlighting Earl's contributions and Richard's misjudgment. Richard sat in his office, his hands trembling as he read email after email. Arrogance, which had always been his shield, now offered no protection. He had relied on fear to control people, and that fear had dissolved in the face of truth. Clara and Mark shared a look across the office. "It's over," Clara whispered. "The company belongs to the people now. Dignity has won." Richard's empire of control, once thought unshakable, had collapsed under the weight of his own prejudice and the unwavering integrity of a single man. Outside the office, Earl's quiet walk through the streets reflected the calm contrast to the chaos he had indirectly caused. Every step was measured, every gesture dignified, a reminder that true power comes not from authority, but from respect and integrity. As the day ended, Richard Hayes faced the undeniable truth. His arrogance had led to a collapse he could neither reverse nor contain. The stage was set for the final reckoning, where justice would be served and dignity would prevail. The following morning, Hayes Global Logistics headquarters felt the weight of inevitability. Employees entered with a sense of purpose, their faces calm yet resolute. Richard Hayes, once confident and imperious, now moved like a man walking on thin ice, aware that every step could cause him to fall. The lobby buzzed with reporters, camera crews, and city officials. The story of Earl Johnson, the man fired for being black despite decades of service, had become headline news. Social media amplified every angle, turning a corporate misstep into a public reckoning. Clara and Mark coordinated employees in a quiet show of unity. Documents detailing Earl's contributions were ready for internal review, and testimonials from clients, vendors, and staff had been compiled for public release. It was no longer just about resistance. It was about accountability. Richard paced, his face pale, his hands trembling. The calls from clients had not stopped. Emails demanding explanations filled his inbox. His board members arrived for an emergency meeting, their expressions a mixture of disappointment, caution, and indignation. Richard, the CEO of a major client company, said sharply, "We are formally withdrawing all contracts. Your treatment of Earl Johnson shows a lack of judgment, integrity, and leadership. Our continued association is impossible." Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. Every argument he had relied upon dissolved under the weight of truth. The arrogance that had defined him for years now felt like a liability. Meanwhile, Earl Johnson arrived at the headquarters once more. Reporters immediately surrounded him, microphones raised. Flashbulbs illuminated the quiet strength in his eyes, a stark contrast to the chaos inside the building. "Mr. Johnson," a journalist asked, "how does it feel to have the city rallying behind you after being fired?" Earl's voice was calm, steady, and measured. "I've never done anything for recognition. I've lived my life with integrity, treated people with respect, and done my part in every community I've been a part of. What matters is not the applause, it's that truth and dignity can never be silenced by arrogance or fear." Inside, employees cheered quietly, a sense of vindication washing over them. HR staff finalized the internal investigation, confirming every detail of Earl's long-standing contributions. Vendors and clients provided statements corroborating his impact. The evidence was undeniable. Richard Hayes slumped into his chair, finally realizing the magnitude of his failure. Every whisper, every report, every article had combined into a tidal wave that no amount of arrogance could hold back. His empire of control was gone. His reputation, once untouchable, was now in ruins. Outside, the city responded. Social media erupted in support for Earl. Headlines shouted justice served. Local community leaders praised his decades of quiet heroism. Even those who had never met him felt inspired by the power of dignity standing against injustice. Earl, aware of the transformation he had helped ignite, walked through the lobby with measured steps. Employees surrounded him, their faces filled with gratitude and respect. Clara and Mark fell into step beside him, smiling quietly. Janet approached Richard, her voice calm but firm. "This is the consequence of arrogance and prejudice. Let it be a lesson to all who believe authority is above accountability." Richard could only nod silently, too exhausted and defeated to speak. He had been humbled, stripped of the power he had relied upon, and left to confront the consequences of his actions. Earl paused at the exit, turning to look back at the office. He did not gloat. He did not celebrate. His victory was quiet, rooted in the recognition that integrity and justice had prevailed. The city, the employees, and the clients had seen the truth. As he stepped into the streets, the sun cast a warm glow, illuminating a future where dignity mattered more than arrogance. And justice could not be silenced. Employees filed out behind him, waving, nodding, and sharing smiles that had once been suppressed. The company, now shaken to its core, would rebuild, but this time on a foundation of respect, truth, and accountability. Richard Hayes, once a symbol of unchecked power, had been undone not by force, but by the quiet strength of a single man who refused to bow to injustice. Final line. Earl Johnson's legacy was no longer hidden in whispers. It had become a beacon, a testament to the power of dignity, the inevitability of justice, and the triumph of truth over arrogance.